Physics dictates that a jet trail must vanish in seconds, yet we are seeing grid patterns linger for 12 hours. The government claims this is normal water vapor, but clouds rarely form perfect tic-tac-toe boards by accident. The sky is broken, and we just found the receipt. Something fundamental has shifted. The lines are not vanishing. They are spreading. They are feathering out, connecting, and weaving themselves into a milky, persistent haze that hangs over the horizon for 6, 8, even 12 hours. They turn a blue sky into a gray ceiling. And this is not a random occurrence. It is a grid. It is geometric. It is deliberate. If you point this out, if you simply note that the sky does not look like it used to, you are immediately labeled a conspiracy theorist. You are told it is just traffic. You are told it is just water vapor. You are told to stop asking questions and go back to work. But here is the problem with the just water vapor explanation. Water vapor does not block the sun for half a day unless it is a cloud. And clouds do not form in perfect parallel lines behind a Boeing 747. This is not a ghost story. This is an investigation into the single most visible yet denied anomaly of the modern era. We are going to look at the official documents, the botched lab reports, and the terrified legislators who are suddenly trying to ban the sky. And we are going to start with the document that accidentally admitted everything. The year was 1996. The internet was young, the world was relatively calm, and the United States Air Force published a research paper with a title so aggressive it sounds like a bad line from a comic book villain. The title was Weather as a Force Multiplier, Owning the Weather in 2025. Let that sink in. Not predicting the weather, not coping with the weather. Owning it? The document outlined a strategic vision where the military could generate precipitation, enhance storms, and induce drought to degrade enemy capabilities. It spoke of atmospheric dominance as the ultimate high ground. Now, imagine you are a public relations officer for the Air Force. You release a paper titled Owning the Weather. And then, almost immediately, the weather starts acting weird. Reports of persistent trails explode. People start seeing grids. The timing is, to put it mildly, catastrophic. It is like titling a book How to Get Away with Robbing a Bank and then claiming you were just writing poetry when the police find the money in your trunk. You lose the right to act surprised when people start asking to see your receipts. The Air Force, realizing the optical disaster they had created, later issued a clarification. They claimed the paper was fictional. They insisted it was a creative writing exercise for cadets, a scenario-based academic project about what might be possible 30 years in the future, not a manual for what they were doing on a Tuesday in 1996. And to be fair to the military, they do run fictional scenarios all the time. They have plans for zombie outbreaks. They have plans for alien invasions. But here is the catch. We have never seen a zombie. We have seen the sky turn gray on a cloudless day. The fiction excuse falls apart when the fiction starts appearing in the real world. By 1999, the federal government was overwhelmed. Switchboards at the Environmental Protection Agency were jammed with citizens demanding to know why they were breathing mystery substances. This wasn't a fringe group of people in tinfoil hats. This was farmers in Nebraska, pilots in California, and teachers in the United Kingdom. A survey conducted years later found that 16.6% of the population across the United States, Canada, and the United Kingdom believed the chemtrail theory was at least partially true. That is tens of millions of people looking up and saying, I do not consent to this. So, we have a visual anomaly. We have a suspicious document. And we have a government denial. But denial is cheap. Let's look at the physics. If the government isn't spraying us, why did the trails change? The official explanation relies on a principle called the Schmidt-Appelman criterion. This is the thermodynamic rulebook for contrail formation. In simple terms, for a trail to form, the air needs to be extremely cold, minus 40 degrees Celsius, and humid enough to sustain ice. Proponents of the chemtrail theory argue that commercial flight altitudes haven't changed much in 40 years. The atmosphere hasn't changed its temperature profile. So, why are the trails lasting longer? The answer might actually be a case of accidental engineering. In the 1990s, the aviation industry underwent a massive shift. They moved away from the older, louder turbojet engines and adopted high-bypass turbofan engines. These are the massive engines you see on modern airliners. They are quieter, they are more powerful, and they are much more fuel efficient. But efficiency in an engine means one specific thing. You are extracting more energy from the fuel, which means the exhaust gas coming out the back is cooler. Because the exhaust from a modern high-bypass engine is cooler, it mixes with the atmosphere more easily to create ice crystals. It widens the thermal window for contrail formation. We built better engines, and as a side effect, we accidentally built better cloud-making machines. So, the chemtrails might actually be contrails, but steroid-enhanced by modern technology. We didn't need a grand conspiracy to ruin the blue sky. We just needed a quest for cheaper plane tickets. But that explanation is boring. It lacks a villain. It lacks a smoking gun. And in 2007, a villain finally appeared. A news station in Louisiana, KSLA, aired a report that would become the holy scripture of the movement. They had taken a sample of chemtrail fallout from a backyard water bowl and sent it to a laboratory. The results were broadcast to the world with terrifying gravity. The report claimed the water contained 6.8 parts per million of barium. Barium is a toxic heavy metal. 6.8 parts per million is more than 3 times the dangerous limit set by the Environmental Protection Agency. This was it. This was the proof. This was the evidence that someone was dusting the population with poison. The video went viral before viral was even a term. It was copied, re-uploaded, and cited in thousands of articles. It remains the bedrock of the theory to this day. There was just one small problem. The math was wrong. And it wasn't just a little wrong, it was catastrophically, hilariously wrong. When independent investigators looked at the lab report shown in the video, they noticed something odd about the testing methodology. The lab had used a test designed for checking soil, but they had reported the results as if they were testing water. Why does that matter? Because the safety limits and measurement scales for soil are vastly different from those for water. But more importantly, the equipment was calibrated to look for massive amounts of material in dirt. When you use that same scale to measure particles in water, you get a reading that is inflated by a factor of 100. The actual level of barium in that sample was negligible. It was consistent with normal background levels you would find in ordinary tap water. The station had essentially measured a person's height in millimeters and then screamed that they had found a giant. They measured the temperature of a room with a speedometer and claimed everyone was boiling at 70 miles per hour. It was a failure of basic science literacy, but corrections do not get views. The panic was already loose. But this brings us to a logical precipice. If there is a global program to spray the entire planet every single day, it would require tens of thousands of people: pilots, mechanics, fuel loaders, air traffic controllers, logistics managers, and accountants. Governments are notoriously bad at keeping secrets. This is the same federal apparatus that cannot launch a simple healthcare website without it crashing for 3 months, yet we are supposed to believe they are orchestrating a flawless, invisible, global atmospheric modification program without a single pay stub leaking? Enter Edward Snowden. When Snowden fled the United States with the digital crown jewels of the National Security Agency, he didn't just grab the files on surveillance. He admitted later, in a podcast interview, that he specifically searched the classified networks for the fun stuff. He looked for aliens, he looked for the faked moon landing, and he looked for chemtrails. His conclusion? In case you were wondering, chemtrails are not a thing. He found evidence of mass surveillance. He found evidence of constitutional violations. He found the dark secrets of the empire. But he could not find a single email about the spraying program. If you want to see more cases where the official story collapses, hit subscribe. We are digging into the files they forgot to shred. Now, if you are a skeptic, you might say, well, Snowden just didn't have high enough clearance, which is a fair point. Or maybe, and this is where it gets truly disturbing, we have been looking for the wrong kind of conspiracy. We have been looking for a secret poisoning program. But the real program isn't secret. And it isn't about poisoning us. It is about blocking the sun. While the internet was arguing about barium and mind control, the scientific community was quietly having a very different, very real conversation. They weren't calling it chemtrails. They were calling it solar radiation management. And unlike the conspiracy theories, this technology is not fiction. The logic is brutal but simple. The Earth is getting hot. Reducing carbon emissions is hard, expensive, and politically unpopular. So what if we just dimmed the sun? It sounds insane. It sounds like something a supervillain would do in a bad movie. But nature has already proven it works. In June 1991, Mount Pinatubo erupted in the Philippines. It was the second largest volcanic eruption of the 20th century. It blasted 20 million tons of sulfur dioxide into the stratosphere. That sulfur spread out, forming a global layer of haze that reflected sunlight back into space. The result? Over the next 15 months, the average global temperature dropped by 0.5 degrees Celsius. It was a massive natural cooling event. The volcano essentially pressed the pause button on global warming. Scientists looked at that data and said, we can do that. This is the core of solar radiation management, or SRM. The proposal is to use aircraft or high-altitude balloons to inject sulfur dioxide into the stratosphere, mimicking a volcano. It is cheap, it is fast, and the math says it would work. But here is the catch. To replicate the Pinatubo effect and keep the planet cool, you cannot just do it once. Gravity works. The sulfur eventually falls out of the sky. To maintain the shield, you would need to replicate a Mount Pinatubo eruption roughly every 18 months. 18 months. That is the heartbeat of a geo-engineered Earth. It is not a one-time fix. It is a subscription service for survival. And this is where the chemtrail conspiracy theory accidentally got something right. They were wrong about the poison. They were wrong about the mind control. But they were right about the fact that powerful people are discussing spraying the sky to change the weather. The difference is the government isn't doing it in secret yet, but private companies are starting to try. And this is where the story shifts from government cover-up to Silicon Valley absurdity. In late 2022, a startup called Make Sunsets decided that waiting for government permission was too slow. They launched weather balloons from a site in Mexico, loaded with sulfur dioxide, and popped them in the stratosphere. They didn't ask the Mexican government. They didn't ask the United Nations. They just did it. And then they started selling cooling credits. For $10, you can buy a credit that claims to offset the warming effect of 1 ton of carbon dioxide for 1 year. They essentially monetized the apocalypse. We went from New World Order conspiracy to grifting tech bros in a record time. Their business model is essentially disrupt the atmosphere. Because if there is one thing that needs the efficiency of a Silicon Valley beta test, it is the air we all breathe. The audacity is almost impressive. These guys are tweaking the planetary thermostat from a parking lot in Baja to sell credits on Shopify. If that doesn't make you nervous, you aren't paying attention. The reaction from the scientific community was swift and brutal. David Keith, a Harvard professor and one of the leading researchers on solar geoengineering, has been researching this for years. He proposed a tiny experiment, a balloon that would release just 2 kilograms of material. That is less than the amount of sand in a child's sandbox. He was met with threats of biological termination. He received messages promising a tragic end to his life. The experiment, which was supposed to happen in Sweden, was cancelled due to public outcry. The public is terrified of this, and they should be, because while the science of dimming the sun is sound, the politics are a nightmare. Imagine if China decides to spray the stratosphere to cool Beijing, but the resulting weather shift causes a drought in India. That is not just a climate issue. That is an act of war. Who controls the thermostat? Who gets to decide what the ideal temperature is? Russia, a country with massive frozen tundras, might actually want a warmer planet to open up shipping lanes in the Arctic. Small island nations want it cooler to prevent their homes from sinking. If you give humanity a knob to control the weather, we will not share it. We will fight over it. But let's look at the mirror. If you are worried about secret government planes, you are looking at the sky with 1990s paranoia. You should be worried about a private startup doing this in their backyard without asking anyone. The barrier to entry isn't billions of dollars anymore. It's a credit card and a tank of sulfur. And the governments of the world are waking up to this reality, and their reaction has been panicked. In July 2025, the Environmental Protection Agency, the Federal Aviation Administration, and the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration released a joint fact sheet. It was an unprecedented move. The document explicitly denied the existence of chemtrails. It stated in no uncertain terms that the United States government is not conducting weather modification and is not releasing harmful agents into the atmosphere. The goal was to calm the public. The result was the Streisand effect on steroids. By denying it so specifically, they convinced the believers that it must be real. Why would they deny it if they weren't doing it? Is a logical fallacy, but it is a powerful one. It is the bureaucratic equivalent of running into a room and shouting, "I definitely did not eat the cookies," before anyone even asked about the cookies. Then came the laws. State legislatures, driven by constituent anger, started introducing bills to ban geoengineering. In Tennessee, in Florida, in New Hampshire. Florida's Senate Bill 56 is a masterpiece of legislative panic. It classifies unauthorized geoengineering as a felony. It prohibits the intentional injection of aerosolized chemicals into the atmosphere. It carries a penalty of 5 years in prison and a $100,000 fine. Think about that for a second. Florida passed a law banning something the federal government says doesn't exist. It is legally the equivalent of banning vampires from the public library. It makes everyone feel safe, and it scores great political points, but it raises some very awkward questions about what the Florida Senate thinks is hiding in the nonfiction section. If the government is running a secret, multi-trillion-dollar global spraying program to control the population, do you really think a fine from the Florida state legislature is going to stop them? Oh no, General. We have to ground the fleet. Tallahassee is threatening to fine us $100 grand. It is theater. But it is theater with a purpose. It legitimizes the fear. When a state governor signs a bill banning chemical spraying, he is validating the worldview of everyone who thinks the trails are poison. And notice the timing. These bills are popping up now, in the mid-20s. Why? Because the technology is moving from theory to reality. The politicians aren't afraid of the chemtrails from the 90s. They are afraid of the make sunsets of the future. The Tennessee law includes language about affecting the temperature, weather, or intensity of the sunlight. They are trying to build a legal wall against the sun dimmers. But there is a catch. The laws often include grace periods for industrial compliance. Some of them mention a timeline for enforcement. And if you look closely at the regulatory frameworks being proposed, you start to see that number again. 18 months. Drop your theory in the comments. Does the official explanation actually fit the evidence? Or are the politicians just covering their tracks? So we have a government denying it, startups trying to do it, and states trying to ban it. It is a chaotic mess. The politicians think banning the planes solves the problem, but they are missing the punchline. If the planes stop, the real nightmare begins. Underneath the political circus, there is a scientific reality that is far darker than any conspiracy theory. The real danger isn't that they are poisoning us. The real danger is that if we ever start this process, we can never, ever stop. This is the concept of termination shock. Remember the Pinatubo effect? The volcano cools the earth because the sulfur blocks the sun. But while the sun is blocked, we are still pumping carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. We are still burning oil. We are still driving cars. The greenhouse blanket is getting thicker, but we don't feel the heat because we have put a parasol up in the stratosphere. But what happens if the parasol blows away? What happens if we start a global injection program, creating a wall of sulfate to protect us? And then, 10 years later, something goes wrong. Maybe a war breaks out. Maybe a cyber attack takes down the spray fleet. Maybe a global economic collapse makes the program too expensive to maintain. If the spraying stops, the sulfur falls out of the sky within roughly 18 months. And then, all the warming we masked for the last decade hits us at once. The temperature wouldn't creep up slowly. It would spike, violently. The planet could warm by 2, 3, or 4 degrees Celsius in a matter of years. Ecosystems cannot adapt to that speed. Forests would burn. Crops would fail. We wouldn't just have a heat wave. We would have a biological collapse. We are talking about turning the Earth into an addict. The sulfur is the drug. As long as we keep taking it, we feel fine. But the moment we stop, the withdrawal ends the experiment permanently. This is why scientists are so terrified of solar radiation management. It is not because it doesn't work. It is because it works too well and it creates a trap. Once you start, you are hostage to the technology forever. So where does that leave us? The 18-month window isn't a countdown to a tragic end. It is the residence time of the aerosols. It is the ticking clock that starts running the moment we decide to own the weather. The government isn't hiding a mass casualty plot. They are hiding their panic. They know that we are running out of options. They know that carbon capture is too slow. They know that emissions cuts are not happening fast enough. They are looking at the Owning the Weather paper from 1996 and realizing it wasn't fiction, it was a prophecy. And now they are terrified that some rogue startup or a desperate nation is going to pull the trigger before we are ready. If you are scared of chemtrails, you are scared of the wrong thing. You shouldn't be afraid they are spraying. You should be afraid that one day they will have to start, because once the planes go up, they can never come down. We are inching closer to a world where the weather is a subscription service, and the free trial is about to end. If you want to stay ahead of the curve, hit subscribe and turn on notifications. Drop a comment below if you remember when the sky was actually blue, or if you think I just need to clean my windows. Share this video because the only thing rising faster than the temperature is the level of denial.